Joining us on the line now, Mario Mancuso. He's the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Combating Terrorism during the Bush years, also a combat veteran, and by the way, a partner at the Fried Frank Law Firm. Mario, thank you so much for joining us here this morning.
Good morning. It's my pleasure.
All right, so we are getting ready to do something against Syria. The conventional wisdom is we're going to lob a bunch of cruise missiles in the direction of military installations that are controlled by Bashar Assad's regime. My question is, if we do that, are we taking sides? Are we supporting al-Qaeda? And is this whole thing, in your estimation, a good idea?
You know, I'll tell you, I think that is the conventional wisdom, and I think that's in fact what we'll do. But the operation, Brian, is frankly a lot harder. This is a really hard operation. Our operational goal, apparently, is to do enough to deter Assad from using these weapons in the future, to vindicate an important principle that you can't use these chemical weapons in the first instance, but not enough to tip the balance. That's hard to operationalize because, remember, Assad thinks he's in an existential struggle. He clearly has indicated that he'll do anything to stay in power, and the only way you'll incent a guy like that in the future not to do that is to actually do something that risks his power. That's almost impossible to do if you've also stated as your objective not to do anything to tip the balance.
So we're doing this because we feel like we have to do something, not because we really want to do something, and it all has to do with just sending a message that, look, you can kill each other all you want, but you can't use chemical weapons to do it.
The answer is yes. I mean, in some respects, and strategically, my personal view is that a stalemate would be a good outcome, frankly, in Syria, because there are no good choices. But the truth is that's the case because bad policy choices in the past have reduced our options in the future. That's probably a conversation for another day, and I think it's one worth having. But we are confronted with the problem in Syria, and we have to address it.
And just one more follow-up, and it has to do with how we'll go about this. Because we had Lieutenant General Tom McInerney on, who said we may have to put aircraft over Syria. I am seeing reports this morning that the British have moved some fighter jets into Cyprus in some kind of anticipation of what might happen.
There was also concern about not having Italy available to us, the general articulated.
I mean, is this like planning in case there's a reaction to what we do, or is this part of the initial operation in your estimation?
I think it may very well be part of the initial operations. I would not be surprised if we also use aircraft in addition to Tomahawk cruise missiles. We have 4 destroyers in the region. We have an aircraft carrier strike group. The Brits have a base in Cyprus, which is about 120 miles off the coast, off of Syria. So we have a formidable military package. And I, for one, don't necessarily think that these assets are being moved, particularly the aircraft, are being moved into the region as a backup. I think they may be part of the original plan. The problem here is that the U.S. can't really do nothing. It can't. We have to. U.S., I mean, if you look at what the chemical weapons attack, apart from the grave danger of normalizing the use of weapons, if you look at what Bashar Assad did, he threw down a very strong challenge to the United States and to the president in particular. The U.S. cannot risk, in my judgment, not responding to that, as bad as the situation is, in light of the poor options we have. And I think we have poor options because, frankly, there have been bad policy choices made with respect to Syria over the past few years.
Mario Mancuso is our guest, and Mario Mancuso, you were in the Bush administration and the Department of Defense, specifically focusing on special operations and combating terrorism. So it seems like every time during the Bush administration, where through the Iraq War, and also when there was some suggestion that maybe there should be some military intervention in Iran to keep them from moving forward with their nuclear program, we heard so many of the critics of the Bush administration saying this is going to upset the Arab Street. You got to be careful about the Arab Street. And, of course, in the last 2 years, we've seen the Arab Street turn into the Arab Spring and topple many regimes. What is the Arab Street reaction going to be to the United States if we do have military intervention in Syria? And also, what will their reaction be if we don't have military intervention?
First, let me start with the premise that I don't necessarily believe that we should not, our strategic interests are not better served by what we think the political resonance of our actions will be, just as a premise. But secondly, the truth is it's probably going to be mixed, but I'll tell you what will happen if we do nothing. After a throwdown challenge of the likes that Assad has given the United States, if we do nothing, U.S. prestige in the region will be in the gutter. That's the problem we face.
As opposed to our prestige right now?
Well, I think it'll be even worse. As hard as that is to believe, I think it'll be even worse.
Wow. And I mentioned the Arabs.
And it will embolden our adversaries because Syria is intertwined with the Iranian challenge.
I mentioned the Arab Spring, and let's just look at the last 12 months. We know that the uprisings in Libya that toppled that regime, so many of the people, still as part of the resistance there, were affiliated with Al Qaeda. We see that in Egypt, so much of the revolution there was tied to the Muslim Brotherhood. There's no doubt that by hammering the Assad regime right now, the U.S. will be aiding the rebellion in Syria, and we know for a fact that much of the resistance in Syria is affiliated with Al Qaeda. How do we separate the fact that we're basically giving assistance to our enemy, Al Qaeda, and other terrorist groups?
We obviously, if we do something against the Assad regime, it will de facto help the opponents, which, by the way, as you point out, many of them are now, again, as a result, I think, of bad policy choices by this administration, are now the ascendant groups are Sunni radicals. But the truth is that we cannot let the situation stand. It will create instability in the region, including, we've heard about Lebanon, but Iraq we really do care about. The challenge, I think, is we're not going to solve anything. We may vindicate some important principles, but we're not going to solve anything by a military attack. What we should be doing, in my judgment, is I do think we need to respond to this challenge. I don't think we should, at least now, go for regime change, but I do think we should figure out ways if we can resurrect some choices, operational choices for the future. For example, a couple of years ago, we had an opportunity before the opposition was basically commandeered by Sunni radicals to support I wouldn't even call them moderate, but let's just call them palatable elements in the opposition. It may be too late for that.
Can I ask another quick question? Because we're running out of time.
Sure.
I need you to make this sort of short. There's going to be a post-strike reaction. Syria's not going to stand by and do nothing. They might likely take an attack against, use it as an opportunity to take an attack against Israel. The Iranians have said that they're not going to stand by and let this happen without some kind of reaction. They might attack Israel. The Russians are not going to be happy about all this. They might might do something because Putin is just the kind of guy who's been doing that kind of stuff lately. I mean, what is likely to be the reaction after the strike?
Okay, I think the Russians and the Chinese are obviously going to be upset. They're going to oppose this in the Security Council. But in many respects, we've already factored that in. I don't think at the end of the day it's something that we should be overly concerned about. I mean, we should think about it, but I don't think we should be something overly
What
concerned
about
about
Syria against Israel and Iran against Israel?
Syria, I think top Israeli analysts don't think that Syria will attack Israel.
Okay.
They may or they may not. But the Benjamin Netanyahu and his security team has been closely coordinating with the United States, and I believe, given the use of chemical weapons, the traditional Israeli position that it's better to go with the devil you know, i.e., Assad, as bad as he is probably now being challenged, such that the Israelis would likely support some form of military action. Listen, the worst-case scenario for Israel is to have the Taliban up on the Golan Heights.
Yeah, there's truth in that.
Mancuso, we got to leave it there, but great stuff. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Hopefully we can call on you as this story develops over the next few days. He's the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense and also currently a partner in the Freed Frank